Is your team not performing well? Is morale low and turnover high? Are you falling further behind the competition? I'm here to help. I'm your host, Shani, and this is the Leadership Show, where business strategy and culture finally meet, and we make the long-awaited shift from rhetoric to results. I promise I'm not your typical boring leadership consultant, and I will help you get your shift together. Let's do this.
Hey, leadershifters, and welcome to another episode of the Leadership Show with Shani. My guest today is Jared Broad, the CEO and founder of QuantConnect. Jared, say a quick hello before I introduce you.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jared. Nice to meet you.
Yeah. So, guys and gals, Jared has so many cool shifting stories to share with us today. I don't even know where to start, but let me plant some seeds for your interest. So, as you may have already heard from Jared's accent, he is not American. He is from New Zealand, so he's a Kiwi. And between leaving New Zealand and now, where he sits in Seattle, the journey has included humanitarian work, a cargo ship to Asia, New York City, being part of two guys in a garage starting a business, all the way through raising capital and getting married to his wife, who he met on Tinder, and maybe we'll talk about that later. And now is the successful CEO of QuantConnect, 7 years in business now. So we have a lot to talk about. Welcome to the show, Jared.
Thank you very much, Shani. It's good to be here. Yeah, it's been quite the journey. It's literally all over the world at this point.
Yeah. So you've got a degree in biomedical engineering. Okay. So why didn't you set up shop, designing artificial limbs or whatever you're supposed to do with that degree?
Yeah, no, and that was kind of the plan. And in college, university, I worked in a company where we were working on LVADs, they're mechanical hearts, and designing wireless power systems. So it would be like a belt that you would wear and transmit power into your body. And then when a prototype was built, it was then going to be 5 or 10 years before it was ever used or seen or in production. And that sort of lead time didn't work for me. I'm much more of an entrepreneur, and I really wanted to see something built and shipped and into
Yeah, more immediate gratification. I get it.
Right. Yeah, all of those approvals took so long and all of the testing. So yeah, I kind of transitioned and went through a period of searching after that.
Yeah, and so I really want to hear about you, because one of the things I think is very special about you in terms of who you are. And I feel like a lot of people who watch and listen to the Leadership Show will appreciate that, say more than, kind of the average individual, is that, you're an entrepreneur. QuantConnect is smack dab in the middle of finance, right? You work with hedge funds and, a lot of assholes, in some people's terminology. But at the end of the day, like, you've got a great heart and you want to do good in the world, and the idea for your company was born while you were on a humanitarian mission. So I really want to have you share that story. Sure. with the listeners here. So take it from here.
Yeah, so firstly, I'm sure they get a bad rep. Quantitative hedge funds these days are much more computer geeks, much more softies, interested in data and math. And I think the old days of the 90s hedge fund world have changed. But so after I graduated, I worked in New Zealand for a while, and did about a year there as a consulting engineer, and then really wanted to travel, and I didn't want to make any excuses for not traveling. So I sold everything I had, put it all into my student loans, and left with like $900 in a backpack. And
Nice.
It was terrifying, but I jumped on a cargo ship as a electrician and worked
Nice.
on this boat, installing cabling. It was like it's like 300 feet long. It's a
Uh-huh.
huge ship, and it carried massive aluminium. And so I rode that up to Asia and was exploring Asia for a while. And there I kind of realized that I wanted to use that same approach of don't make any excuses. I wanted to work and modernize humanitarian work.
Mm.
So the humanitarian industry basically hasn't changed. They're still using paper logistics. They're not doing anything different from what they've done 20, 30 years ago. So
And
I
when you say
happened to,
humanitarian work, let's just clarify for listeners, you mean nonprofits and NGOs essentially.
yes. So I didn't have a specific idea at that point, but I knew that it was in that nonprofit sector and the systems of helping people after a disaster and such. And I was in deep China, and there just happened to have been a massive tropical cyclone in the nearby country, Myanmar.
Uh-huh.
And so I hacked my way through the border and was able to get into the country, just like a week after the disaster, and was in sort of the first month of responders working with locals on the ground to get supplies in. It was a really weird situation because there was a military junta. It's like a dictatorship, and they didn't want the world to know how bad it was. So there was no press getting out, and nobody was allowed into the country. It was weird.
Yeah, but at the same time, they needed help, right?
They absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
There's about
And so how
200,000.
do you volunteer? Like you just show up? How do you get assigned some help to give? Like how does that even work there?
Yeah, it was very ad lib. I just showed up and started meeting people, started talking, started learning about the different organizations that were there, and went to just knocked on their doors and looked to where I could help. And yeah, eventually I found a local group who were doing runs down the rivers and loading up boats full of supplies. And so we were loading these boats and smuggling it down the rivers. So it was crazy. But eventually that kind of turned into a full-time job, and I did UN Habitat and a German organization called Malteser, and worked there for about a year, working with the organizations and doing runs from Bangkok across to get supplies in. So really got to learn the NGOs, how they worked, how the logistics worked, and see where they needed help. And my immediate supervisor was Argentine. He had a very hot temper, and we were working for a very rigid organization. And so he was incredibly frustrated with it. And I was a Kiwi who was very blunt and always looking for a very pragmatic solution. So the two of us gelled super, and we started an organization that did services for these NGOs and tried to modernize them. And that kind of became my focus of work for the next couple of years.
Okay, so that was kind of your first entrepreneurial venture.
Yeah, effectively on the global scale, I always dreamed of being an entrepreneur, but it just happened. Like I knew that I wanted to work in the space, and then after working in the organization and meeting the right people, we just worked really well together. I was this engineer that preferred coding, and he was a people person who worked well with, had a lot of contacts with NGOs, and so we worked together to build software for these organizations to cut down the amount of overhead and put everything into digital records, so they had a
so awesome. So the
trail.
money that they have can go further. That's so important. Right. Yeah.
And they know exactly where it goes, and they have it all audited and recordable.
Awesome.
That was great, and that kind of took me. We did work all over the world for a number of different organizations, but it was essentially a disaster-focused project. So when you first have a natural disaster or something that happens, there's no systems in place, and we were really good at getting systems set up very quickly because it's all computerized and automated, and you could just instantly set up an NGO as soon as something's needed. But yeah.
I love it. Like, even if that's the only major thing you accomplish in your lifetime, you've done more than most people do in decades. That's amazing.
No, it was it was just a stumbling. Things just happened, and I always tried to take the view of what's the worst thing that could happen.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, worst thing, you get your arm cut off, it's fine. Like, I don't know.
You got another one.
Yeah, and what are the chances of that? It's never the
And
worst
as a biomedical engineer, you can go get one that works pretty well.
Right. It'll be okay. So it's especially where I was working, it was pretty safe.
Yeah.
Never any real risk. So it was a great couple of years, and the only problem was they had a lot of downtime. So there was projects that were like 3 to 6 months apart, and so I would spend 3 months preparing for the next one, or just doing nothing, or waiting or finishing up other work. So I really got interested in applying all of the biomedical engineering math, the modeling of complex systems, to the financial markets, because it's this infinitely hard problem. The financial markets are just millions of numbers influenced by billions of different factors and people all over the world. And so it's this awesome math problem. So I just started spending my downtime doing that, programming algorithms, like getting all the data.
As an awesome math problem. That's a new perspective. I like it. Okay.
I think for computer geeks, that's exactly how they see it. It's just data and numbers, and awesome, let's play with this and put it into models. And so that was like 2010. It became a full-time obsession, and I eventually like bootstrapped capital from friends and family and started doing it full-time and running these models live in the markets full-time. And for about 2 years, I was living in Chile, where there was super cheap rent and great technology, and running this sort of bootstrapped fund, running these models.
Yep.
And it was an awesome learning experience again. It was like this foundation to learning about all the challenges that quants face, learning how there's nothing like it in the world at that point. It was 2010. If you go on the internet by then, there was nothing about quantitative finance and algorithmic trading. And so at the end of that 2-year period, I kind of finally had an algorithm that was working, and I was just thinking, what do I do? Like, do I go and raise capital and try and scale this up, or do I apply the system that I've built to try and help all of these other engineers who are in the same boat? Like, anybody who wants to do this. It took me 2 years full time, and I was working my ass off. I was doing 12 hours a day in my apartment, hacking away, building these systems. So yeah, I decided to build the system and open it up to the world. And that became the foundation in the middle of an apartment in Santiago, Chile. That was the beginnings of QuantConnect.
Awesome. So sort of like the Linux of quant software.
Right. So to run quant software, there's a massive amount of technology that you need. And that's just like Linux. Linux is this operational foundation to the entire internet.
Right.
And so we see QuantConnect as this foundation to the entire quantitative algorithmic trading movement.
I love that. And, and people, I remember when Red Hat, was first out and doing this, all the open source stuff, because, they were small cap stock back when I was at Goldman and whatever. And, people are like, well, how are they going to make money if it's open source? Well,
Right. Yeah.
I think they figured it out.
Right. Yeah, Red Hat's a nice icon in the open source world. But there's always a way, and I think the business cultures are evolving so that the value isn't so much in locking things in and making them private. It's about getting more people to use your work by making them open and easily accessible. And then other business models come out of that.
Yeah. So and again, here's another analogy. You're bringing the shared economy to a space that used to be, protect things with his life.
Right,
no, it's
right,
proprietary. No, no, no,
right,
you have
right.
to pay a lot of money for this.
Yeah. So algorithmic trading is one of the most secretive areas. Everybody's super paranoid about their code and about sharing it. And so we decided that we will try and take this open source ethos that Linux had bootstrapped and started off and try and apply that to the finance world.
Yep.
And so all of the core algorithmic trading technology that QuantConnect's made is all open source. And there's thousands of people that download it, run their own algorithms with it. Hedge funds that start up and use the lean technology to do what they need to do.
Okay. And what does lean stand for? Because that's your acronym, and it isn't Six Sigma lean, it's something else. Yeah.
Right. Sorry. So QuantConnect is the company that we made, and it's got an open source project called Lean, which is the engine that runs the algorithms.
Yep.
So it's kind of like Red Hat is the company and Linux is the
totally. I know that. I just wanted to make sure listeners got that. Yeah.
Yeah. So the Lean engine, that algorithmic trading engine, is completely open, and people can go and download it and use it as they wish. Yeah.
Yep. Got it. Okay. And so the culture of, or sort of your philosophy on developing your platform in terms of it being open source and collaborative has also been the cultural philosophy that you've instituted in your company culture. So talk to us a little bit about what are the fundamental tenets of your corporate culture that you've insisted on since you've grown from you and another guy to the size you are now.
Sure. So one of the things I learned in NGO work was that it's very important for you to work with the community that you're serving. So it's no different with financial technology too. And because we're serving there's almost 100,000 quants now from all over the world, we work very closely with them to design the features, to design the API. How's it going to work? What do you need? Like we set some ideas and we seed some ideas, but a lot of it is quite eye-opening in terms of, we think you want this, and then once we really go and get people's buy-in, they say, oh, it's not quite that, it's something slightly different. And so it's shaped a lot of our core decisions as a company and the technology that we build and the design of it. And so we're a strongly technology company. It's in our DNA, it's in the way we work and everything. So that lean engine and the design and the philosophies in it kind of reflect our corporate philosophy as well, which is, it's open and pluggable and extendable, and it can fit the different needs that you need as a quant. And so that kind of reflects how we went and we got community feedback and we said, what do you need to do? We're trying to gel 10,000 different opinions and build it into this technology. So that's how Lean's evolved and become such an open, flexible engine that can be used in so many different contexts.
Yeah.
Because as you know, like the finance world is so varied. Everybody's doing different strategies, different time horizons, and trading in different markets. And it's almost impossible to build a single piece of technology that can serve them all.
Sure.
So
what do you say to the people who hear that your platform is open source and say, you're crazy, you've got a valuable asset, you should be charging for it, and it shouldn't, and you can't control the quality if it's open source?
I think we're making a very long-term bet that the network effect of having everybody use our platform will be far more valuable than the short-term revenues that we could generate by charging people for using the platform. So being that operating system, being that standard that people can converse with, that two people on the other side of the world can say, oh, I know that lean algorithm, I know the standards you're using and talking about, and that becomes the winning standard that then people choose to go forward and use. Because if you're a project manager, you're trying to make the smart choice. How should I build this algorithm in my fund, or how should I design the system? It should be the one where you can recruit talent that knows how to use it, that it's a familiar open standard that you can manipulate and fix and not modify. So that's the benefit of open source, is that everybody knows the standard. If they don't like it, they can change it. So if there's a specific corporate thing they need to do, they can go and change it. So it's a riskier long-term bet.
Yeah. Well, and that's the key that I was trying to suss out of you is, like, in the short term, there's some some things that you're compromising, but in the long term, you think it's the right thing. And that's the point I really want to drive home, is how many of you are also thinking about the long-term consequences and benefits of the decisions that you're making from as high as your strategy and, into little execution decisions. That's really where the world's going. And Jared, you're a millennial, right? And the proverbial they say all these terrible things about millennials, how they're, lazy and entitled, and, all they care about is saving the world. Well, I think you prove them wrong, right? Because you're the furthest thing from lazy and entitled. You've worked your ass off. You've taken big risks. There's zero entitlement with you, and you're putting all of that to work for greater good and with long-term thinking. And honestly, it's leaders like you who are the future of the world. So, bravo.
We'll see. They're big words, but we definitely have. We realize that finance doesn't move quickly. It's a slow-moving industry relative to the rest of the world, and that if we were to make real change here, it would be a 10-year endeavor. It wouldn't be a 3-year startup where we make an app and exit in 3 years.
Sure.
And so we kind of settled in for the long haul and made plans and philosophies for that vision, that long haul. And it all the way down to, like, when it was myself and Gustavo, and we were bootstrapping in the very, very early days in Chile. And it was literally in a concrete room in a house. A garage is a benefit, a nice term for it. It wasn't a garage; it was a concrete room. It's a storage room in a kitchen, so it was even smaller than a garage.
As long as you had Wi-Fi, who cares?
Yeah, exactly. And it was basically climate controlled because of the concrete walls. So it was like a nice thermally insulated room, and it was building and designing this tech with this idea that we love what we're doing. And it's not that it's a lot of course it's hard work, but we're loving every minute of it too. We are building and doing hard technology that nobody else has done. And we're opening up to people who are just blown away by it, who love what we're doing. And so it's a very rewarding work too, even doing it under a very untraditional route.
Excellent. So, talk to me a little bit more. We talked a little offline before we started a bit about the Bill Gates philosophy of philanthropy, which it sounds like you share. So let's just talk about sort of how what you're doing dovetails with that in the long term.
Yeah. So I hope I didn't misquote him, but I believe it was Gates who said that it's better to work on becoming wealthy and then donate to humanitarian causes. And when I was younger, I wanted to try and mix the two. So I actually got into algorithmic trading because my idea was that a lot of these humanitarian issues are caused by funding. Say, for example, there's restrictions on how the donations can be used, and it's artificial restrictions based on politics or things that are going on. And so if we just could solve the funding issue for NGOs, then I could make an algorithm, it would make lots of money in the markets, and we could donate that all to NGOs. And it's very tricky to mix that business and donation part, and you're starting to see more of it now with the B corporations, the
Yeah,
certified B
certified
corps,
B corporations, or 10% for
right?
the world, and yeah.
Yeah, you're starting to see more of that, and that's great, and it's awesome that the world's sort of come to this point where we can mix the two. But I think at the moment we're kind of on a trajectory where we will probably do the more Bill Gates philosophy, which is it might be two separate entities. We'll use the culture of openness, transparency, honesty, integrity, and build all those things into fintech and the vehicle that we're doing. But it might not necessarily be a financial relationship. It'll be a separate one. So it's a challenging shift in my mindset. As I grew up, I was always working on these businesses that were trying to mix business and humanitarian projects. And we'll see. We'll see what I do next. Maybe now the world's moved.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's the thing is we can't be fixed and attached to the way things used to be. And when the time is right, you'll do what you're compelled to do at the time with the resources and the expertise that you have. I love it. You know, we sort of didn't finish on the culture piece, and you just threaded it back in. So I want to pick it back up because there's another piece of your culture that you shared with me that I think is worth talking about, which is do the hard things. Tell us what that means to you and how it plays out in the behaviors of folks in your company.
Yeah. So the technology that we're building is hard, like order of magnitude hard. And it's always tempting to make shortcuts in those buildings that will make it easier for the short term, but in the long term, you'll pay a heavy debt. And so the idea that if you invest today to solve the challenges that you're working in business and in your life and in the technology, if you invest today to do them the right way, that it will pay off with a much more solid foundation for the future. And so I try and direct the team in that way. But if we just put this line of code here, we can have it working today. It's like, no, come on, let's do it right. Otherwise, we'll pay this debt later.
Right, no Band-Aids.
Right. So the short version of it is do the hard things. So don't take that shortcut, do the hard thing.
Yeah.
Get it.
Well, it sounds like it's another way to not get caught in short-term thinking and to think about the long term, even at the expense of time or whatever in the short term. I think it's great. So I think we probably can't talk about your geographic shift from New York, where you ended up after Chile, right? So you got your funding, set up your business in New York, and then ended up within the past year moving to Seattle with your wife. And so, you know, I sort of was joking about it in the intro. And maybe this is a shift for some people that you can marry the person you met on Tinder.
Yeah, so it was in New York, and she tells me that it was her very first Tinder date. So she was looking for some war stories, and all of her friends had bad Tinder dates, and she was really looking forward to some war stories to share with them. And I met her, and that was her first, and I thought this woman's too amazing. I have to marry her. I have to get her off Tinder. And then immediately after the date, it was like 20 minutes later, I was like, what are you doing tomorrow? Do you want a coffee? What are you doing the day after? But I'm not going to give you a chance. I'm going to lock down every minute of your day until, we got married pretty quick.
So what was it that made you just know, like, that she was the one on it sounds like on your first date?
We're both 80s babies, so it helped we grew up with a lot of the same cultural phenomenon, but her personality and her just light, she has a lot of light, and we're just a perfect partnership. because we balance each other out. And when she say goes away to visit family for a week, I end up working 16 hours a day and destroying myself. And she comes back and I'm back in balance again. Yeah, it's just a really nice partnership and the light that she brings to the relationship. So.
Oh, it's such a delightful little online love story.
Yeah.
Online dating love story, rather. And so why the move to Seattle?
I think it was part of their multi-generational plan again. So New York is awesome and I love it. And it was the right time for the company. But we are a heavy technology company that needs quiet and space to think. And we solve hard problems that require, hours and hours of uploading to your brain to get all the information in. And when the siren goes by or the foghorn honks on the river, whatever it is, that New York has this way of interrupting you. So, it was I think like in 10 years, where will we be? What will the team look like then? And does it matter where we are? And it didn't need to be in New York. It needed to be somewhere green, beautiful, high tech, with a great economy, like a great workforce that we can draw from to join the team. And Seattle fit the buildings.
Love it.
Yeah.
Again, like looking forward and figuring out, okay, no excuses for us not focusing as well as we need to focus to create this highly complex coding. Yeah, I love it.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
So any last words of wisdom for listeners from the perspective of a young CEO?
Read more. Yeah, I glean so much from reading these days, and it's so hard to make the time. But I have a 20-minute commute every day, and so I try my best to read. Yeah.
And listen to podcasts.
And listen to podcasts, exactly. Even better than learning and experiencing things on your own is learning via secondhand experience. If you can learn it in a podcast or a book, awesome. Yeah, save yourself.
Yeah, exactly. We can never stop learning. Like, if we stop learning, we're gonna stop growing and just wither away.
Yeah, and I think one thing that was vital to us is that the worst consequence is never as bad as you think. So just do it. Like, what's the worst that can happen? You go broke, you end up on the street. Okay, that sucks, but you can get up. You can do it again. Like, it'll never be as bad as you, especially while you're young. It's a little harder to say that now that I have a family.
Yeah.
But still, it's in your 20s and 30s before you have heavy commitments, just go for it. Don't be afraid. Yeah.
I love it. And then after your kids are grown and out of college, like I work with a lot of clients who are sort of at that stage in their careers, and they can amp up their risk profile.
Right.
Again.
Right. Yeah, I have a lot of respect. I don't know those people who start businesses when they've got kids and a family, and that's a different risk profile altogether, rather than just taking personal risks. So, but the core of it is that people are just too afraid that there's no reason to be in. They should just jump.
Yeah, I love it. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been so fun to hear your story and lots of really wise pieces of advice from a relatively young leader. So leadershipers, I hope you caught all of these things and can learn some lessons from this no excuses philosophy, right? Like, no excuses not to travel, no excuses not to get to Asia, no excuses not to do something open source, even though conventional wisdom would tell me otherwise. No excuses not to marry the woman I met on Tinder, right? I mean, so many of the decisions have been like, you know what, let's just figure it out. Let's just do it, which is oddly aligned with the large message that was crafted today around long-term thinking. It's like we got to make these short-term, sometimes tough decisions in service of what we want long-term. And so I love how beautifully you have already woven those two together and are a role model for the people in your business, as well as now anybody who has joined us today on the podcast. So again, thank you so much for joining us. And if people have questions or want to reach you or are interested in contributing to Lean, how would they reach you?
Yeah, absolutely. Please, feel free to email me personally. It's Jared, Jared, at QuantConnect.com, or they can contact me through the QuantConnect website. If you're an engineer and passionate about the open source, you can find Lean at GitHub/QuantConnect/Lean, and I'll send through the links after.
Excellent. Okay. Leadershifters, thanks for tuning in again today. We will see you next time. In the meantime, if you need to reach me, you know how. hello@theleadershiftproject.com if you need help getting your shift together. Until next time. Mwah.